Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Josh Leyenhorst. He is a fractional CFO, and his company is called BasePoint. He works with companies in a variety of industries, including construction and tech. He hosts a podcast called Business Growth Factor and has developed a series of tools for founders to clarify their financial situation. It's going to be a good talk. Let's dive in. Josh, you have had an interesting trajectory over the years. Tell us a little bit about your path. How did you get to where you are?
Yeah, it was not directly linear, I suppose. um,
They
it-
rarely are. The paths usually aren't,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was more exploratory, I suppose. I guess my background, I did my undergrad in molecular biology and biochemistry, so I worked in sciences for a number of years. I had zero interest in accounting and finance in university. The reason being, I guess I just thought it was, tappity tap on the keyboard, bunch of data entry. I was like, that sounds like the most boring career to ever do. So didn't even cross my mind. And so I got into the health sciences, really enjoyed it. Worked in pharmaceutical research and development for a few years. Then my wife and I started a couple of small businesses, and I took a data-based approach to decision making in the business. And so, started using numbers to make decisions on inventory management. And in the process, I was like, I think this might actually be accounting. And so, but a fun
Right,
part
right.
of it, because it's like the decision making uh, side of using the numbers. So, um, yeah. So, anyways, I from that experience took our accountant out for breakfast one morning and just picked his brain a little bit on the profession, and he sort of steered me into that direction. So I decided to go get my CPA designation. It's a few years after I'd finished university, so I kind of stumbled into the profession, I suppose, and um, yeah, ended up taking a position in finance for a construction company, or where I worked for about 6 years and worked my way through there. So I got to touch all the operational sides of finance and following that. So I thought it'd be there forever because it was a fantastic company based out of Surrey, BC. Really great owners, great leadership team. I thought it'd be there forever. So I took my accountant out for breakfast following that whole journey just to say thanks and close the loop and everything. And then he sort of pitched the idea of coming to work with him. And so that was a hard decision because I loved where I was, but it was better hours, better work-life balance, better for the family, very close to home. So I eventually did that. And then long story short, decided to start my own firm, and that's where we're at. So very not linear when it came
Yeah,
to being in university. I'm I'm going to be an accountant and then start my firm, and then off we go.
yeah, yeah. This might be a bizarre question, but molecular biology is what you said, right?
Yes. And biochemistry. Yeah.
And biochemistry. How do you feel like that prepared you for what you're doing now?
The analytical approach and
Yeah.
the decision making off of the numbers. The way I kind of describe it is accounting and finance is kind of like the science of business. And so I get to
Mhm.
understand business at the molecular level when I look at the financials and we dig deep
Ooh,
into the
that's good.
numbers.
That's good.
Yeah, I know it sounds really nerdy,
Yes.
but we're all nerds in our own right, right? So that's the way I sort of see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I started university in computer science
Okay,
and then switched to philosophy.
interesting.
And, mainly I went into philosophy because it's so lucrative and there's so many job opportunities, right?
Now that said, I mean, sorry to cut you off, but like philosophy is very logic based, right? Like if
Yeah.
you take the logic side of it, I suppose. But
Yeah, that's why I bring it up because I've always felt like it has served me well.
mm-hmm.
And both when I, was primarily doing software development and now doing what I'm doing now with coaching and consulting, like it was I'm, you know, I'm kind of a fan of broad education actually. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it does end up helping even if it's not a clear path to,
And
because
maybe
a lot of times we go through university and it doesn't turn out to be a straight line anyway. I mean, you were a
yeah,
molecular biologist
totally,
in biochemistry, and now you're doing accounting, and so
yeah.
it's not a guarantee that you get a certain degree and you end up doing that anyway.
I mean,
So
my initial undergrad focus was kinesiology, and so
right,
even as I
right,
started that, we started bumping into some courses where the prof would be like, "Okay, this is how this happens, but we're not going to get that deep because that's beyond the scope of the program. It's like, well, I want to know how things work, like down to the molecular level. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's when
right.
I swapped out.
So let's start with this. So you're a fractional CFO, and I think that some people probably understand perfectly when they need a CFO versus something else, etc. But not everybody does.
Right.
And so when you think about these different roles, and maybe this is kind of basic, but I think it's helpful just to define our terms or get everybody synced up who's listening, right?
Mhm.
So you have bookkeepers, accountants, controllers, CFOs, financial advisors, like help us just kind of understand the lay of the land. Um, Maybe not spending too much time on, like, I think everybody understands the bookkeeper is day to day, like you're reconciling physically,
Mhm.
you're digitally reconciling the actual transactions. That was probably the most well understood, but help us delineate the roles and responsibilities of these different groups of people and when you should think about getting who.
Sure. A- As a business owner,
Yeah.
internally
Yeah.
or fractionally or either or, I suppose.
Well, that's a good question too. I think that's a separate question, fractional
Mhm.
versus internal. But
Okay.
first of all, let's just do the roles.
Yeah, I think the best way to differentiate between the three, bookkeeper, controller, and CFO, and there's, a spread in between there. If you look at just dive in a little bit deeper. If you look at financial operations in a larger company, those are sort of like sections of a long spectrum of different positions that can exist in finance. So, but if we were to sort of carve out key features of financial operations for the average small, medium sized business, um, the way we kind of describe it is bookkeeping, controller, CFO is kind of like hindsight, insight, and foresight. So, hindsight is kind of like what happened, get the record keeping in, that's table stakes for business. Like, and when I say that, a lot of business owners don't even have really good bookkeeping. So that's very, very important to make sure that that's tight and current, because when that doesn't happen, you start missing on things like remittances to like tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and so that's when you start having penalties and interest, and you can avoid that by staying on top of things. So that's hindsight. Yeah,
Okay, this is great. This is great. So that's hindsight. I'm just gonna. Sorry, I might interrupt here, but
yeah, no problem.
it got me interested. So let's say that somebody is, as far as they know, pretty good on the bookkeeping front, right? They
Mhm.
think their books are pretty good. Where is there typically room for improvement, even when somebody feels like, well, I had no idea that that was
Mhm.
actually, going on and that could have been better. I thought we were pretty good. So in other words, forget about the people that just know they're totally out of date,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
people that are doing pretty good, where are some likely rooms for improvement on that side?
It's funny you mention that because I would say type books are one of the biggest challenges we bump into when we take on new fractional CFO engagement, because a lot of people think their books are good. But
Right.
to make good decisions based on your financials is like garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have good financial information readily available, then what you're using to make decisions moving forward becomes more of a challenge. So, common issues, double entering things. And this is going to get into some of the, I guess, the nitty gritty accounting type stuff, but things that are entered twice, things that are not entered at all, things that are entered in the wrong spot, things are just not reconciled. So it may show a certain way on the balance sheet or the income statement, but by the time you kind of clean it up and reconcile everything, it's vastly different. I mean, we do year end accounting in taxes for clients as well. And sometimes we don't do fractional CFO work for. And so when that comes in, sometimes their preliminary information or data, financial information looks vastly different from what it is when we're done, simply because there's a lot of stuff that gets cleaned up in the process, right? So um, there's a whole range of things that
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
happen on the bookkeeping front, uh,
Yeah.
keeping it current. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Any common misunderstandings? I think everybody, like, if expenses are expenses and revenue is revenue, but then other things are kind of like, how should this be
Mm,
handled?
yeah. That's a good question, and that would, I would say, depend on the industry that we're talking about. So, when you have, for example, we work with a lot of construction companies and tech companies, so revenue recognition becomes pretty important in those businesses, because just because you collect money at a certain time doesn't mean you earned that money. Quite often, in fact, if you have prepayments, like you prepay for something for the year, that's not necessarily earned revenue at that moment. And so you kind of recognize that revenue over time. If you have monthly
Yeah.
recurring revenue for something that's not always delivered at that particular month, now, service terms and stuff like that in your contracts can play with that a little bit, but that can impact revenue recognition. So that's where things can change, right? Somebody might look at their income statement in their accounting software, maybe like QuickBooks Online or something, and they'll be like, yeah, it looks like we've got net income and it's looking pretty strong. But then if we have to back out a bunch of the income that they recognize because it's not actually earned yet, it's showing a loss. And they're like, I didn't expect that, right?
So you've collected some money, but it's actually just going through to somebody else, but it's in
Yeah.
the account. That's scary situation. Quick pause. A word about HabitStack. If you're a founder with a leadership team, you know the feeling. The week fills up with meetings and fires to put out, and by Friday, nobody's touched the strategic work that actually moves the needle. That is exactly what HabitStack fixes. It's a strategy execution program I created and run with ambitious leadership teams. We meet weekly, get your goals broken down from the year all the way to what needs to happen this week, and I hold everyone accountable to do the strategic work. Teams I coach go from scattered and reactive to focused and making dramatic progress on the things that matter most. Even when the founder can't join the weekly meeting, I'll be there. If that sounds like something your team needs, go to habitstack.com and book a call. Now, back to the show. Okay, so let's keep going. So that was hindsight.
Yeah.
And that's bookkeeping. And
So
now
hindsight is like what happened, right?
Yeah.
What happened over the last, like whatever period of time you're looking at. Insight. So the controller level work that we do is we call it insight. Kind of does two things. One is it looks at the bookkeeping to make sure it's good. So there's a checklist that we usually like to go through to make sure things are done, things are reconciled, things are tight, compliance is good to go. Because that's at a base level what should happen, and that's what a controller normally does in a company is make sure the bookkeeping and the compliance is all good. On top of that, it also answers a question, how are we doing compared to maybe what we should be doing, right? That's one of the questions that it might answer. And so then what you can start doing is looking into some financial analytics, your actual profitability metrics, some of your balance sheet metrics, and see how those even compare to industry benchmarks with other companies in the same industry. Now, this kind of gets to your earlier question. Are there things that people do wrong? They don't necessarily know what they're doing or whatever. Where things are coded as far as like, do you put payroll costs in your cost of goods sold or you keep it in your overhead? Those things will start to impact how you might compare to benchmarks. So this is getting a little bit nerdy, but so those things are important, right? We'll look at benchmarks and how a company might compare to industry relative to the financial data that's out there. So that's the insight side of it.
Right. And that's all controller.
Yeah.
Okay, what is it? An accountant. So where does accountant fit into? You're talking bookkeeper, controller, CFO, but where does accountant fit?
Yeah. So accountant, that's a very interesting term because it can be very broad in its use and application. So accountant can mean the person that you go do your taxes with. Accountant can mean the person who is in charge of your financial operations. Accountant could be the person that you hire to do your bookkeeping. It's a very broadly used term.
Okay, so really it's not as useful as a term as bookkeeper, controller, CFO. There's more of a continuum there.
Yeah, bookkeeper, controller, CFO is indicative of like what's being delivered. Accountant is a pretty broad term that a lot of people will refer to us as accountants, right? Oh, I'll talk to my accountant about that.
Yeah.
But it could be a pretty broad term for sure.
Okay, cool. Talk to us about CFO.
Yeah, so CFO, that's the fun part. So CFO is the foresight, right? So where bookkeeping is like what happened and controller is like, what does this mean? CFO is more answering the question, where do we go from here? What decisions can we make and what can we do moving forward? And so the best way, the analogy that we'll quite often use with clients is a sort of like Google Maps for business finance. So we help clients understand where they're currently located, right? So in Google Maps, you're like, where am I? And it gives you a little pinpoint, right? And then you determine where you're wanting to get to from a financial perspective. And that should be tied to the overall strategic goals of the company, right? They should be aligned. Your financial targets should be very much aligned to the overall strategic goals of the company. So Um,
You
so yeah,
mean the founder's personal targets, or the revenue targets need to be aligned?
yeah,
What targets are we aligning with what?
that's a really good question, Scott, and we can dive into that in a sec because I think that's a really important point. We actually have a tool which I'm happy to make available to your listeners, like no cost or anything, and it's a tool that helps founders think through what it is that they want, the cash flow that's required to feed that, and then what the business needs to do in terms of cash output, after tax cash output to feed that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you think about it, our businesses are essentially vehicles to get us to the goal that we want to get to personally, right? That's currently with current cash flow coming out of a business, but also in the future, right? Because at some point there's going to theoretically or ideally be a liquidation event where you sell your business, harvest value out of it, and then that further projects you into the future that you want. So getting back to the Google Maps for Business analogy, you kind of put in that destination on your map, right? And then that becomes your roadmap. You're like, hey, we have to go this direction. But it doesn't stop there. And you asked when we were talking about this previously too, the difference between like budgets and forecasts. Budgets will kind of be where you lay that out, right? That's your initial route. Forecasts are the recalibration of that process.
Mm.
So, generally we'll meet with clients on a monthly basis. So our regular CFO cadence is once a month we meet to talk about that journey, the roadmap, and see how things are progressing. And then the 2-week intervals in between there, we do tactical. So using the road trip analogy, because I love road trips, the CFO call is like, are you on the right path? Do we need to recalibrate the route? Do you have enough like gas in the tank, which is cash, right? All those things. And then the 2-week intervals in between, we open the hood. We're like, how can we make this engine perform better to get you there quicker, more efficiently, whatever it might be. So that's the CFO side, which it's a shame because now again, we all go through our own journeys to become who we are. But if I had known that there was this really fun part of accounting and finance, I probably would have dove into it in university.
Right,
But
right.
instead, I did this 10, 15-year journey to get to that part afterwards, which is okay
Yeah,
because I
it's
still,
maybe who
still
you
enjoy it.
are though. So,
Yeah.
but okay, so what in practical terms, the CFO part. So you're going to be like again, a kind of a similar questions. I think like what is a a good example of something, an adjustment that came out of you putting your CFO hat on with a founder, and they're like, you know what, I got to make this is a concrete change I got to make
Mhm.
as a result of this conversation with Josh.
It helps identify what's driving the revenue, what's driving profitability. Most businesses often to their detriment will have many revenue streams, right? The more focused a business becomes, the cleaner that can become. But a business with a lot of different operations going on, a lot of different revenue streams, could have some products or services that are effectively cannibalizing the profit of other products or services unbeknownst to the owner, right? Cash is coming in. It looks like business is humming along. Just like if you actually look at the individual products or services and dive into those numbers, you may recognize like, oh, wait a minute, this is losing you money every time you do a sale, right? So it's understanding your profitability drivers, your revenue drivers.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's just some switches that can be flipped that can
Let's
vastly
get out of that business. Let's not do that anymore.
yeah, exactly. Or
Right.
maybe it's a price adjustment, or maybe it's how can we add value in order to justify a higher price, whatever it might be. Maybe there's some costs that can be trimmed, right, as part of the process. It's very common for business owners, especially to get very busy running their businesses. So they start to lose track of those little things. If you start a business, you typically intuitively know, okay, this makes money, this doesn't make money, this is working the way it should, this isn't. But then when you start to layer operations in there as things grow and expand, you have people that are now doing things. You don't necessarily know if it's being done as efficiently or properly as it should, right? So it's a good way of just coming back to that and be like, hey, this is losing you money. This is making you money.
Right.
Sometimes it's a matter of knowing, because cash flow forecasting is very much part of what we do as well. So we'll kind of project out cash flow and be like, okay, based on this, you're currently wearing too many hats in the business. You need to, to steal the words from someone named Dan Martell, who I did some coaching with, you need to buy back some of your time, right? You need to get somebody who can um, do some of this like more administrative work or whatever it might be to free you up to do more valuable work. And so then we'll look at the cash flow forecast, be like, can you do this?
Right.
The cash flow justify it? And then from there, they can make decisions that then free up a lot of their time to then focus on more higher value activity in the business.
Yeah. So it sounds like, strategic decision making is the purview, not exclusively, but kind of the focus of the CFO
Yeah, using
level.
the numbers, right? Because everyone has a pulse generally on their business. How are things going? Um, to know for sure is nice, right? To
Yeah.
see what that
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
translate into in 3 months from now on the income statement or on the bank balance is very helpful. To know if you need to, a very common thing that we'll touch is like equipment. Hey, we're thinking about buying this, a dump truck. We're thinking about buying an excavator or whatever it is, right? Does it make sense? Should we buy this, right? How should we buy it? Should we lease it? Should we, uh,
Right.
finance? Like all different options there. So, um, will it make sense just from a business perspective to own this, or should we just continue renting it? We need it, whatever it might mean. So then we can look at the operational side of things, like the benefits there, as well as the financial impact, and then map it out. So we'll be like, okay, in
Yeah.
3 months, this is what this will look like. So it's not a surprise. You're not like, we really should not have done that, right? So-
Dang it. Yeah, I see that sometimes you have service businesses, maybe an agency, and they're thinking about building a product, and it's important to think. I mean, being in the product business has a lot to be said for it. There's
Mhm.
a lot of nice things about being in the product business versus the service business. Um, Pros and cons both ways, but but nice to have at least do the napkin math on the on the
Yeah,
product, and
yeah.
maybe I think. You would take it even farther than napkin math. I usually napkin math, but, um,
That's
can I
about where we
just
stay, Scott. No, I'm just kidding.
what's that?
I said that's about where we stay. We just keep it on the
Okay,
napkin
just
and
napkin
and
math
throw
it out, yeah,
darts at the wall and see what happens.
yeah. I have, Josh, a question for you that we didn't talk about talking about that it just occurred to me, and
Sure.
I have no idea if there's any context for this, but sometimes do you know much about how, like, cooperative ownership works, like employee-owned companies? Do you have much exposure to that and how that works? And sometimes I'm mused about that being kind of a cool structure, but I don't know if you have any experience with that.
Like an ESOP or something like that.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
Like,
There's definitely it's becoming more common, and even the Canadian government for your Canadian audience has introduced incentive to have employee buy-in opportunities just from a tax perspective for the seller. So it's becoming more common. So from an exit planning perspective, if you're or like transition planning or whatever you want to call it as the business owner, at some point you're going to leave the business, right? So um question is how. So do you sell it to somebody external, like family member? Employees are a great option because they're already vested in the business. They care about the business. They have an interest in seeing it succeed. You can kind of phase it in. If you have real now, good culture is key for that, right? I mean, otherwise you're going to have like a very dysfunctional culture that's
yeah.
got ownership as well. So, I don't deal with the mechanics of that regularly, but yeah, it's definitely becoming more common and is definitely an option for growing businesses.
I mean, more broadly, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts and like, it's a common discussion. Like, well, clearly, um, we need, ideally, people are motivated, or as motivated as possible.
Hmm.
Right?
So
One
how do
way
you do that?
what's that?
So how do you do that? How do you
How do you
incentivize
do
that?
that? I mean, one way is, salary. Um, One way is, I mean, there's in the hundreds of different ways,
Yeah.
culture and recognition, all those kind of things. But in terms of money,
Hmm.
um, the salary, bonuses, profit sharing, and ownership,
Ownership.
maybe in that order, right? Of
Yeah.
complexity and what you're giving up and how much motivation you would
Hmm.
hope to generate. Do you advise people about this kind of thing, and how do you help them think about how far down that path
Hmm.
to go? Like, gives you the highest return?
It's good. That's a really good question. Again, it totally depends. Typically, the most expensive form of financing. So if you think of financing for a company, where does a company get capital aside from generation of cash from its operations? It's either going to be debt or it's going to be equity, right? Uh, Equity tends to be the most expensive form of financing because it's kind of locked in. So if I'm a lender and you're like, hey, we need 50 grand for an operating line for the next 3 months or whatever, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, you can give me your firstborn son as like collateral. That's usually like what ends up being in the terminal. Not officially, but like, they ask for everything for collateral, and
Yeah.
usually a personal guarantee is what that ends up being, right?
Yeah.
But then you're paying an interest rate. And then the interest rates, somewhere between 5 and 8% right now or something, depending on your credit, and your risk. But if you get somebody to become an owner, so they have an equity interest in the business, they can't just call the debt. They can't just be like, I'm
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
pay me out. So because the risk and the investment is higher, typically, the expectation of return is going to be higher. So that was a long-winded way of saying generally equity financing is more expensive than debt financing. Now, if you have employees coming in as owners through some kind of plan, whatever it might be, they have a vested interest in the success of the company. So what you're kind of achieving there is alignment of the employees' goals and interests with the owner's interests for the company. That can be achieved in a different way. So there's a really interesting model that I encountered recently, and it it's essentially a vested profit sharing model. And so instead of giving away equity, because here's the other kicker, a little side note, like on the equity side, give away equity, sometimes there's an element of control, or there's like more cooks in the kitchen, right? Like there's more people who have a say in what's happening on the strategic direction of the company. That becomes more of a challenge. And so just a word of caution for anyone listening who's like, I need some cash, I'm just going to bring in a partner. Think of it like you're marrying somebody. Like it's that kind of level of cooperation that's required to, to make a business work well. And sometimes almost more complex in terms of some of the ramifications. So vested profit sharing. Um, what it does is, say you have an employee, it's like, hey, your profit sharing potential in a given year might be $10,000 based on, these metrics or whatever it might be. And just aside for that, sorry, there's a lot of side streets, but I think they're important to mention. Um, Bonuses should always be tied to some kind of objective criteria. If you're just giving bonuses to employees without letting them know how they earned it, what it was tied to, um, there sometimes becomes a sense of entitlement that I just get a bonus every year, and they don't necessarily know what they should be doing to game it. Like we're all people, we all respond to incentives, like the first law of economics, right? So we should, and we will always game whatever incentives we have before us. And so you want to try to align any kind of profit sharing or bonus structure with specific objective criteria. And it should not just be financial, right? Whatever the job is that the person's doing, a salesperson, you want to not just have them turn over sales and generate good revenue. You want to make sure that the customer is still satisfied at the end of the day, right? So things like that,
Mhm.
like non-financial metrics are key. Getting back onto the highway. So
Actually, this is interesting. I just want to say one thing about. I don't know what you think about this. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. But one way that I've talked about it with folks is kind of like um, three buckets. Kind of like whether or not they achieve their goals, just like in black or white, whether or not they achieve their goals, but also the quality of the execution of those goals matter
Mm,
too. In other words, it's a wild and woolly world. Sometimes you do everything right and you still miss the goal. And
yeah,
so we should take into account how the quality of execution. And then the third bucket is like discretionary. I don't know what you think about that because it's a little bit different than what you just said, maybe, but it
right.
does feel like there needs to be some latitude for the founder or who's making the decision about the bonus. Just be like, you know what, I can't. We didn't quantify this. I cannot quantify this exactly, but they are a rock star, or
Right.
everybody is better because of them, or for something, or
Yeah.
they're totally toxic. Like there
Yeah.
needs to be some kind of qualitative judgment call
Right.
component. I think, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. What's your take on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably what you we're maybe alluding to a little bit there was like, I don't know, I call it compliance because it could be such a bad word, but like compliance or alignment maybe with company culture, right? So if
Hmm.
somebody's like wildly out of company culture and like say maybe very toxic, that could be hard. So maybe now that's going to be a lot more subjective. And as an accountant, that just drives me nuts. But like
Yeah.
if you
I
can
know you're the
somehow,
wrong guy to ask. Yeah.
if you can have a rating of 1 to 5, that's maybe from assessments of multiple people or something. Like I'm sure there's ways you can drive that a little bit, but yeah, I think there's a lot of creative ways out there. Put it this way: I'm very much opposed to people getting pay raises and bonuses for simply taking a trip around the sun with a company. You know what I mean? But
Mm,
that's what it often becomes.
right.
And I don't think it should be that. I think it should be, you know, pay people fairly. And I would argue competitively, because if you pay people well, they stop having one foot out the door and they start really wanting to crush it in their work. Um, but then when it comes to
Sorry,
bonus,
Josh. So just I'm going to ask you about that.
yeah,
So what are in your mind competitive? What is how much over market or over like the average does it take for somebody to not be looking?
that's a great question. And that would depend on the industry significantly because at any time there's, as you know, there's poaching going on all over the place, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
best place to find an employee is to, I didn't say this, but pick them from somebody else, right? I mean,
yeah.
it,
I mean, that's just most of the listeners will be founders of software companies
sure.
or adjacent, and so I mean, I'm not asking for a specific number, but it's probably not
Yeah.
50% over market, and it's probably not 2% over market, right? I don't know. It's somewhere.
Somewhere in between. I would say, yeah, this is a very good question, and there's no right answer because what incentivizes somebody to both stay and crush it at their work is not just financial, right? It's circumstantial. Where do they get to work? What's their work environment get to be like? Is there
Yeah,
flexibility with time? What's paid time off look like? So there's a lot of things that might not even be financial in nature. Does the company do retreats once a year so you get to
yeah,
connect with everybody? Some people care about that. So I think probably the best way to dial that in would be to maybe deviate a little bit from a very structured interviewing process or candidate intake process that's more cookie cutter and try to get to know them a little bit more. Even do something like a disc analysis or something to get a sense of what drives them, and try to make an offer that speaks to that a little bit more. Um,
mm,
than what might just be like a cookie cutter offer with like a 10% premium to and hope that that works, right? Because it just takes another recruiter to be like, hey, we can give you 5% on top of that, right? And then
right,
off they
right.
go. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it goes. Yeah, there's all the other things, but money on the money front, like you do need to make it so that like they don't feel. Yes, well, I wonder if 10% is not a bad rule of thumb. Oh, layering on all the other things, but
mhm.
if they're I don't know, that strikes me as about right.
Yeah,
So
no,
okay,
I think that like our approach is to overpay
right,
here. So because here's the thing, if you have to hire somebody, it takes 3 months to get them up to speed and fully functioning in the role that they're doing, right? So if you I know this is getting in the weeds and totally different topic, but it's super critically important, right? I mean, if you need somebody doing something now, 3 months ago is when you should have started getting them hired and
yeah,
trained up, right?
ideally,
So if somebody leaves, it's really, really important. I've had this conversation with owners before as part of the budgeting process and stuff, looking at things that the company does to, for lack of a better term, like bless their team, right? And it's like, hey, this is very expensive. Like the retreats are expensive, the food is expensive, all these perks that they have are expensive. But if you look at recruiting fees, right, 23 to 25% of the annual salary of the employee, that becomes very expensive when you have some key employees that might go. And so then all of a sudden you're like, okay, why don't we just not pay these recruitment fees for 2 to 3 people a year? No offense to recruiters, there's some fantastic ones out there, but if you can keep good people and avoid that turnover and avoid the retraining and all that, all the time that's required to go into it, because it costs like between five and probably $20,000 of time and training and inefficiency to get a pretty high level employee up to speed, right? So if
yeah,
you can
yeah,
save that, then that's key. So that's where, in my mind, anyways, justification to overpay is definitely there.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe
I
that
have no
sounds
idea what we're
counterintuitive from
talking about.
a
No, I
CFO,
do.
but
I think I know. I think I can track it back to what we were talking about. So we're talking about
we're talking about
vested
compensation
profit
plans.
sharing.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, yeah, like the profit sharing thing, right?
Your vested profit sharing. Yeah.
Yeah. So um, what what that model does is it says, okay, say your profit sharing potential is about $10,000 for the year, or your bonus potential. Rather than giving the $10,000 that year, it vests over 3 years. So now it's going to be like 3,333 bucks. Webinar math is the worst, but like, so it's like they get a section of it for the next 3 years. So the first year
No
will be
matter
as
what, it's locked in. They're going to get it as long as they stay. Is that
long
right?
as they stay. So, and they'll get the interest on it too, right? So it's not like they're losing out on interest earning potential. So there's still benefits that they get from it, like sitting there. Now, I'll get to the liability thing in a second there. But what that does is it makes them want to stay. And then the next year, their bonus amount's going to be bigger because it'll be, first year vested, and then the first third of the next one, right? You can do it for 3 years, 5 years, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
creates the long-term perspective that you want from your team, while still being able to give them a bonus and have that tied to objective criteria, right? Now, what it does do is it does create a liability on the company balance sheet. So you need to be
Yeah.
aware of that in terms of what that does with financial ratios. But that is another option so that you don't necessarily have to give away ownership. Because the ownership,
Yeah.
in my mind, generally should be one of the last things you give away. Like that
Right.
should be one of the last things. Generally, there's always exceptions, but
Yeah. So what you avoid with that vested profit sharing is I'm going to stick around. I'm actually going to the last 6 months of the year, like I'm out of here. But as soon as but I'm going to wait until January
right.
because they get paid out. But
Yeah.
that totally helps with that part, right? They'd be
Yeah.
better off just leaving because it's going to be, they know they're not going to get it right away.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Now there's, you have to have your lawyer look over the employment agreement for that, right? Because you don't want to get yourself into a sticky situation where it can be argued that, they're entitled to the full amount if it wasn't clear, right? So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to talk about the legality of
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
that is a model that some companies are using, and it's interesting because it allows for that long-term alignment, which is ultimately what you're trying to get to with your team, right?
And I just want to think about that for a second. So the equity definitely gives you the long-term part. And you get that with the scenario you're describing. Equity also gives you the desire for growth part.
Yeah.
And that what you're describing does that as well on a year-to-year basis,
Right.
not necessarily the 5-year basis, right?
Right.
Which so you still it's not quite as good on that front.
Totally.
That you don't get like, well, or and I think we're going to sell for 100x or something, and so I'm really, really committed. You wouldn't necessarily. I'm just thinking it through. If there's
Mhm.
anything that's still left on the table with equity compared to equity, I think there is a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
a diminishing gap. It's a diminishing gap of what you're leaving behind with doing a profit sharing thing. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
And it might be like a first step towards employment ownership as well, right? It's like,
Maybe,
here's a way
yeah.
to sort of try it on without actually getting people into an equity situation.
Do you ever see people do profit sharing like on a quarterly or monthly basis, just to because a year is a long time.
Hmm.
Sometimes, well,
Yep.
for a lot of us, so I don't know. Do you ever see people do that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We've seen it happen on a like quarterly basis. Monthly is tough because you can have swings. I mean, say it's based on a certain, I mean, even a quarter. This gets back to our conversation earlier with like, the record keeping and bookkeeping.
Yeah,
Say a company has a massive invoice that comes in following the close of that quarter that was actually tied to that quarter. Now that's going to impact profitability, right? So, but I've seen it, yeah, quarterly, in project-based businesses, project-based,
project based, right?
incentives,
Interesting.
right? So it's like once everything's like all said and done and we've closed out the project, what do we look like on the profitability front? So you get a portion of that. So there's like company-wide profit sharing, but then you also have specific to whoever had some kind of accountability level on
Yeah,
the success and
yeah.
profitability of the project.
Yeah, how do this is a problem with commission-based, quotas or targets and stuff like that, is that, the right, um, there's always, it could be, you're gaming the system in some way, right? Like
Mhm.
we want to we're not going to hit the target, so we want to push this deal to the next one, or where you're kind of like shifting in these. The same thing I can imagine happen, no matter what boundary it is. Well, you can really see that with the monthly, but it made me think of it when you said that. The monthly, like the swings could be so big, and
Mhm.
there's no profit. There's no loss sharing. That's the problem
Yeah,
with profit sharing. There's no
that's
loss
right.
sharing. Does anybody ever do loss sharing,
Yeah.
Josh?
I've never seen it aside from ownership. Those are the people who bear the brunt of the losses or the soft periods or the slow periods, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so those are things to keep in mind because say you have a seasonal business where you get a lot of business happening in a short period of time and there's maybe reliance on line of credit for the slower seasons. There's going to be interest expense that eats into the bottom line of the business during that period of time, which technically is subsidizing the profitability of the projects. And so for companies that are looking at profit sharing, you want to make sure you capture all of those things.
Right.
Otherwise, as the owner, you're bearing the entire brunt of some of those downward pressures on the bottom line, and not necessarily accounting for that when you're profit sharing. So that's something to look at as well.
Right. Right. Good discussion. I like that. I like so vested profit sharing. Um, it's prideful for me to say this, but I'm delighted to know that it crossed my mind. Something like that crossed my mind
That's
one time.
awesome. Well,
There you
because it's a
go.
good idea. So, I think
Yeah.
people who have good ideas are probably like, how can we do this in some way? Right. But if there's not a
Yeah.
framework that's readily available, then it sort of evaporates. But
Well, yeah, and as a non financial expert, um, I don't know what the gotchas are. Maybe it's a
right.
terrible idea, but now
Yeah.
I know. Okay, well, all right. So people actually do that thing. That's cool. All
Good
right.
term
So
you mentioned there, Scott. Sorry to jump in there, but the
yeah, go ahead.
gotchas, like, we call them pitfalls. Those are like the landmines of the business arena that our goal is to try to help remove those for
Right.
for owners, right? So it is those gotchas. It's like, hey, this is a great idea. It's like, and that's why sometimes we don't want to be the wet towel, but it's like, yeah, but right, you got to
Mhm.
keep in mind this and this and this because we're always thinking on the risk mitigation side as well.
Right.
But yeah, the gotchas is a really good term to be aware of, right? The pitfalls to be aware of in doing anything really big and new in the business that's outside of maybe what you're used to. Get some good
Right.
help and review on that before you just, sometimes evolution, not revolution, is the way to go with business growth, right? But if you're going to
Right.
do something big and revolutionary, make sure you get enough eyes on it to be like, oh, landmine right there. Be aware of
Right.
this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's tricky, Josh. Like, I think that's good advice. Clearly, that's good advice. And also, there's a lot of things. I'm getting philosophical here a little bit, I guess,
That's okay.
reflecting.
Feedback on
So
it.
naysaying is like a really big problem, right? Like there's a lot of things that happen in this world because somebody did something they shouldn't have done.
Mhm.
Basically, they had no business doing that, and it was a bad. It was like it was unlikely to succeed. But but then uh, they found a way, and so I don't know. It's an unanswerable question, I guess. Sometimes I wonder. Well, how do you personally balance? Let me ask you that, Josh. How do you personally balance the need to like give a dose of? I mean, you're obligated to caution people like these are the ways this could go wrong. But also, I think you like entrepreneurs, and you want them to try stuff. And so, how do you balance in
Mhm.
yourself those two values?
That's where the black and white part of being an accountant comes into play. So I will tend to be conservative in recommendations of something new. Um, I'm not afraid to give bad news for an idea to an owner. I would rather a client want to leave working with us um, because they just don't like that we don't support everything they want to do, rather than a client leave to be like, they gave us the worst advice and told us to go ahead and it was a bad idea,
Right.
right? So I would rather nix a bunch or at least give enough parameters and and awareness around ideas that people can proceed with caution on some new things, right? So it really comes down to modeling, and the modeling, modeling is never perfect, forecasting is never perfect, but trying to think through as many scenarios as possible. So we call this scenario planning or what if analysis, right? To be like, okay, so based on this model, say it doesn't work out as good as it used to, right? So like maybe this product you're thinking about bringing to market, uh, it's overpriced. What happens if you have to drop it 50%? What do the numbers look like then, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we try to look at, and then they know their risk parameters, and then they can make a decision from within that. And if it's a massive range, right, and that it's up to them to decide, do I want to play in that much unknown, right?
Right.
I
Right.
suppose maybe the best way to put it is like we're trying to remove a lot of unknown from a new thing that's not been experienced yet for that particular business.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you familiar with Playing to Win?
I
But
have the book and I have
yeah.
started it, but I have not finished it.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up is just because I'm reminded, this conversation reminds me of it. There's a great approach to big new ideas in there, which has to do with like identifying all the things that must be true in order for this to
Right.
be a great idea. What
Sure.
are all the things that must be true?
Yeah.
And then you look at the things that must be true and that you're really not sure are true. There's some things that must be true and you're quite sure they are. There's other things that they really must be true, like the people must be willing to pay X in order for this to work. Like that,
Hmm.
that's a good what must be true. And then you design an experiment. You design a way of testing whether or not that is true or not,
Right.
right? And then you go through that process, and the person who gets to design the experiment is the most skeptical person in the room gets to design the
Right.
experiment.
Yeah. Allowing
And
for dissent, healthy
yeah.
dissent in discussion, super important.
And the way to move through that descent is to identify what must be true, to identify an experiment designed by the most skeptical person. You go out and you run the experiment and come back with results. And if you do that process, and what's the next thing that must be true, right? And
Mhm.
you go through, and then until there's nothing left that must be true that you really are worried about. And then basically that strategic choice, it's not a leap of faith, like it's
Right.
not, it's decided. Like everybody in the room by definition, because it's the most skeptical person who
Yeah.
created the test,
If you convince that
so
person.
you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I really like that. But what it does is it takes a lot of discipline to move through a strategic decision that way. I mean, it takes
Mhm.
months. It takes months to like come to, in many cases. I mean, when you're super small, a couple co-founders working on something, you don't necessarily have to, um, you basically talk to customers and move
Mhm.
through that way. But
It's a
when
lot
there's,
more agile then, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but when there's more at stake, a lot of times it takes, well, even
A lot more
when you're
rigor.
small, it can take, a long time. It can take months to figure things out. But anyway, I always
Mhm.
thought that was, a way. I think this is maybe what brought it up too, is as a coach, I'm supposed to be like, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You're limitless. And but I think that people fail all the time, and that, I know that people say
Yeah.
like, well, failure was just learning. Like, no, but it's better not to fail. Like, let's try not to fail.
Yeah.
um, and so I think this is a nice way to respond. It's like, oh, you're right, could be great. So
Mhm.
let's prove it out in the nitty gritty. Let's prove it out. And if the person is like, oh, I don't want to go to the trouble to prove it before I'm going to do this thing, I'm like, well, I don't think you're that serious then.
Mhm. And I think your comment there on failure too, Scott, is good because if you think of what you want to try to do, and to use an analogy of like years ago, I used to do a lot of snowboarding. First time I ever tried a 360 was off the end of a half pipe, and so it was pretty hard landing, and I did not make it, and it was a hard landing, right?
Yeah.
So I failed the landing. I could have done it somewhere else and had a softer landing. So sometimes you're still going to fail when you try something new, but at least try to arrange the environment or the parameters in a way that it's not catastrophic. I
Right.
didn't break anything, fortunately, but like, it's a softer landing if something does go unexpected in a way that you don't want it to go. Because failure, I mean, business, there's a lot of bushwhacking in business, right? A lot of trying new territory, trying to get to new places, things you haven't done before. Um, it was helpful. A coach of mine once said, "There's always something broken in your business, and that's not working, right? Because whatever worked now, maybe you're at like $100,000 of revenue, kind of in the early stages, and you get to like 5 million. Whatever worked for 100,000 is definitely not working at 5 million. And once you hit 5 million, like getting to that 10 mil part, there's other things that have to happen in there, and things will break along the way. And it's
Yeah.
important for business owners to understand that because, you know, I include myself in this. We have a lot of pride in our business, and we don't want it to look bad, right? We don't want to feel like we've failed. So if we do fail in something or something looks broken, it can be an identity crisis if we don't recognize the fact that, it's actually normal for things to kind of fracture a little bit as growth happens. Your responsibility as the owner is to identify that and then learn how to pivot and how to adjust based on what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It's like fail small and quick.
Yeah. Yeah. With a
And
soft
then,
landing.
and yeah. Yeah. I guess that's what I mean by small.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
fail soft. There it is. Soft and quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Okay. So CFO, I think, I think a lot of times it's not crystal clear for a founder that they need that level of support, right? And
Hmm.
I know, Josh, everybody needs a CFO right away, but
Not everyone needs
okay,
the mindset of strategic finance, but
okay,
not everybody needs someone like me right away. And in fact, oftentimes it won't make sense. Sorry, I'll let you
okay,
finish
good.
your thought
I'm
there.
glad you said that. I was teasing because I think
Sure.
you're right. Probably not
Yeah.
everybody needs this, and so, but but also it's not a yeah, so it's not a good idea to hire a CFO before you need one, but it's also not a good idea to go without a CFO when you do need one.
Hmm.
So help. What rubric or what heuristics can you recommend that people use to discern what situation they're in?
It's a good question. And sometimes a lot of people, what they're asking underneath that is, what revenue level do I need to be at to get a CFO? Um,
It could be, but and maybe add to that because you may be a certain um, I would imagine certain particular types of businesses or situations or
mhm,
feelings even
mhm,
can indicate, and they may kick in depending on the situation at dramatically different revenue levels,
mhm.
I would imagine.
So I would say, if I were to sum it up, you need the mindset for appreciating and desiring strategic finance. Because if you don't appreciate it, if you don't recognize the importance of it, you won't value it. And so, because the flip side of that coin then is, you need to be able to action from the insights, right? I mean, again, the hindsight, insight, foresight, right? It's like, what happened? What does this mean? Where do we go from here? What do we do with this? Doing action. That's the key part. And so, we'll look at the information, we'll map it out, be like, okay, these are things that need to happen now moving forward based on the information that we have. If that doesn't happen, right? If people aren't moving on the recommendations or with that information, then we're not really worth it, right? I mean, as a CFO, like, what we're doing is we're looking at the deployment of dollars in the business. And, to steal an analogy from Kevin O'Leary, he had this analogy where it's like, you want to see every dollar in your business as a little soldier, right? You don't want to send them out to
Mhm.
die unnecessarily. And so I really like that analogy. And so when we look at the numbers, obviously we have a cost as well. And so there needs to be some kind of return on that, right? I mean, for any overhead costs, this is as a quick metric to help your listeners too. Think of your gross margin, right? So maybe it's like, just use 50% for math, right? Easy math. Whatever overhead costs you decide to take on, you should divide by your gross margin, and that's how much revenue you have to generate to cover that position, or how much savings you need to be able to materialize. And so, if you're thinking about hiring somebody for $100,000 as strictly overhead, and you have 50% gross margin, you need to be generating at least $200,000 simply in revenue, simply to cover that role. So
Right.
we're acutely aware of the fact that we are a cost on the income statement, and so we want to make sure that it's valuable. So if at any time it doesn't look like a client is benefiting from the services that we're doing, we will let them know, because um, it just goes against my grain to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
like, you're not benefiting from us, but we're just going to keep charging you anyways. We like to work with growth mindset companies that are on an excited journey to move forward. And so generally that doesn't last very long. We'll know pretty quick within like a month or two if somebody is well fitted to do it. Typically in our intake process, that's where I try to filter it out as much as possible because our onboarding process is fairly extensive. And so I don't want to go through the process only to find out, you know what, this is not a good fit for you. So
Yeah.
our discovery call is generally where we try to filter that out.
Okay, so somebody who's motivated, like has a growth mindset and is willing to take the input and do something with it. That seems like a good
Yeah.
kind of baseline. What else? Like, what do you typically? What typically? What I mean, you did mention revenue. Like, what are the
Mhm.
revenue levels that you usually see?
It's funny, like you would think that companies that are doing 50 million in top line revenue would have a CFO and have somebody with strategic financial guidance, but there are many that exist that do not. So
Right.
definitely at that level, you want somebody helping. The lowest I would say that we've helped clients in this capacity on the revenue side, again, it depends on the nature of the business, right? I mean, if you have a construction company, a lot of their, they might have high revenues, but they have significant costs on the projects, right? So it really does depend. But we've helped companies that do as low as about 1.5 million in top line revenue, but generally it's between the 1 and 10 million top line revenue mark, because at that point, the owner has kind of gone through the growing pains to recognize they need help in some operational things. So they're not wearing all the hats. So they have the bandwidth to be able to do the next steps that they have to do. They've also gone through the growing pains of having to fix things that are broken in the business. They usually have some good systems in place that we can start to integrate into, and they have a bit of a growth mindset. I mean, companies that hit that $1.5 million mark in top line revenue, they're on a path at that point, right? Like they know typically, unless they've just stumbled into it, they generally know what they're trying to get to or where they want to go. And I don't know if you want to get into the personal goals and how those align at some point too, but that's where that starts to come into play as well, right? What do
Right.
they want?
Becomes something a serious possible at that level. It becomes impossible to dream about something more than a good salary. um,
Maybe a good way to put it is, and I'm going to steal kind of the idea from, oh man, the story brand framework. What's his name again? Donald Miller.
yeah, yeah.
So, really love his framework. And the whole idea is, you want to serve as the guide for the hero of their own story. And, to steal from from Star Wars, which my kids are like big Star Wars nerds. If Luke Skywalker is like, you know what, I'm not really interested in blowing up the Death Star. Like, I'm just going to fly my X-Wing or whatever that thing is called when he flies around.
Yeah.
I'm just going to fly it around. Like, I'm not really interested. Yoda would be like, okay, we're not doing training. Like, you
Yeah, we're
don't
not
bother
studying.
come in. Right. So that's maybe the idea is it's like, we're here to be a guide for the business owner to take their business into the future that they want to see it happen. If they don't have that drive, they don't have that vision, if they don't have the gumption to move forward on the steps that they need to, then it doesn't make sense. And so that maybe is the best way to answer your
Yeah,
earlier question of when it makes sense or not to, or doesn't make sense to do that.
yeah, yeah. That does make sense. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about this framework that you have. I think it has to do with connecting the founder's goals to the company's goals, and yeah,
Hmm.
tell me about it.
Yeah. So we have, ultimately, and I mentioned this earlier, at the end of the day, our businesses are vehicles that get us to our overall personal goals, right? Um, Lots of times, so often, you'll see business owners start a business, right? They have an idea what they want to see. Then they get very busy just in the day-to-day operations of the business, and that becomes very consuming. It grows, life happens, they get married, buy a house, all the things of life kind of happen. But fast forward 5 years, it's like life happens to them, right? What we try to do with clients as much as possible to get them to think about, what do you want to happen to your life? Like, what kind of life do you want to build? And this might kind of even speak to what you do on the coaching side too, right? Um, so it get them to think through different areas of their life, right? So kind of the first one is, we call it, and there's F's. We like to use alliteration, five F's, right? So We get them to think about faith or fulfillment, right? Like the most important things in their life, where they want to give their money, their time, personal development, those things. Think about all the things you want to do there. Your family, right? What do you want your family life to look like? What do you want to do with your family? All those childcare, all that type of stuff. Fitness, right? The health of your body and your mind. Um, all those things. Then we call it fun and lifestyle. It's kind of like a euphemism for like everyday stuff. But where do you want to live? What house? Like where do you want your house to be? What kind of vehicle do you want to drive? How warm do you want to keep your house? All those types of things, like your lifestyle, right? And then we have finance, right? So maybe you want to pay down some debt. Maybe you want to save up for retirement. Maybe you want to build up a bit of a security blanket. So 5 sections that we kind of get them to look at, because if you say to somebody, build a budget, the eyes glaze over, right? But if you get them to think about their life in these different areas, these different compartments of their life, and think about exactly what it is that they want to do, and then put numbers beside it. It's like, hey, where do you want to go on vacation, right? Well, I want to go here and I want to go here. 2 vacations, throughout the year. Maybe it's going to cost this much in total. So you lay it all out, all the costs. Then we have a tool for this. Happy to make it available for your listeners. It divides it up into 12. So now you have a monthly cash requirement to feed the life that you want, not the life that you're stumbling into, but it's like, okay, I may live here. I actually want to go live over there. And so it's going to change how much that'll cost by this amount, whatever it is. So once you know what your cash flow requirement is as a business owner, now you know what your business needs to generate in terms of cash. So then we work backwards to effectively reverse engineer how the business works, right? So if the business has to generate a certain amount of cash, then we look at, okay, well, what's your overhead like for your business currently? So if that's your overhead, that means you have to be generating an extra amount of gross profit from your sales, right? Well, what's your current margin? Okay, so based on that, you need to generate a certain amount of revenue. Now that you know what your revenue is, and what that difference is going to have to be. Now we look at some of the leading indicators on revenue growth, right? Your lead generation, your conversion rates, all those things. Because what that then does is gets away from the annual goals of like, build the business like 10% year over year on our top line revenue, right? Which, that's a better goal than no goal. But what it does is it helps you be like, hey, this is the actual number that I need. And this is what it translates into in my day-to-day work. I need to get this many leads coming in the door on a weekly basis. I need a conversion rate that is about this. So then you know the levers to start to pull, the dials to turn, to really tweak how your business performs to feed your lifestyle.
Okay, let me ask you this question, Josh. So it's not exactly devil's advocate, but it's an interesting kind of like area of human motivation, I think. Because you could imagine what you're describing to be like. So go back to your map thing. So you are here and you want to be there. These are all the turns, and this is the exact distance and the driving time or whatever. So now you know all those things, but you still have the same car, and you actually need a better car in order to make that journey. But knowing all those things, do you ever think that a founder, the reaction is kind of like, well, it's not like I can work any harder, or I'm not even sure that I'm doing the wrong thing. Like, yes, I mean, yes, I need more money. Like I'm doing all the things that I can think of already. In other words, it's kind of nice to know that with more precision, but I already knew that I need to triple I already wanted to triple the company.
Right. Yeah.
So what does it do for them to have kind of the specificity when they already are very motivated to grow?
What the specificity allows for is knowing which levers to pull. Because when you have a business, as you know, there's so many things that can happen in any given day, right? Fires come up, like all sorts of things. Knowing what you should be focused on at any given time in your business is key. And I would argue, a good practice is every week, like Sunday night, look at your calendar and put blocks in there that are like fully non-negotiable so that things that move those needles happen. And so that's where tracking specific metrics come into play. Like, okay, I already knew I needed my revenue to grow by X. Like, okay, well, what's going to drive that, right? Um, you're going to have leads, you're going to have conversion rate, you're going to have retention rate, you're going to have referral rate, right? You're going to have average cost per customer, number of transactions per customer. These are specific drivers that drive revenue. So there are now that you know there's drivers, there's specific things you can do that move the needle on each of those drivers. And so sometimes when they have that awareness, that's awesome because they know something needs to happen. And so then it's more directing the focus into where they can get the most output for the effort or capital investment that they put into the business to move the needle on that.
Yeah. I think the brilliant part of what you're talking about, or at least one of the brilliant things about what you're talking about, is the breaking it down to the month,
Mhm.
right? Because it's real easy to feel like, well, my goal is to grow a lot this year, and I'm working hard, and maybe we're gonna, and you know, if things play out just right, we'll make it, and we'll know at the end of the year whether or not
Mhm.
we made it or not.
Yeah.
And it's too late. It's too late. You know,
Yeah.
like you need to know this month and even this week, whether or not you're tracking with what you decided was likely going to need to happen in order to achieve that.
Yeah.
Because and then to translate, this is kind of you're speaking my language here in terms of the way I think about it is those KPIs. They're either going great, and that which in which case you just kind of look at them periodically and make sure they keep going great and manage them lightly. But then some that aren't,
Yeah.
and so those need to fall down and to be specific. Like, okay, well, so what's the project
Yeah.
that we're going to do to
Mhm.
make it so I don't know, the number of leads we need to generate, it's half of what we need it to be.
Yeah.
And so what's the project that we're going to do? Well, we're going to make more calls. How are we going to make calls? I can't make more calls. Well, we're going to have to find somebody or whatever. Like you just
Yeah.
have to like tie it up in a bow. Like what is actually going to
Totally.
happen in order to make this change? And
Yeah.
not like, well, hopefully more leads will come. Like
Yeah.
maybe Google will change their algorithm and we'll get more leads.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like that is not a surefire way. So
Yeah. 100%,
I
Scott.
like
That's yeah.
I
Um,
think in some ways what you're describing on the financial side is kind of what HabitStack does on the project side.
okay.
So like in other words, those KPIs fall into like, okay, and then this is what not the this is what the projects that we strongly suspect will lead to those changes in the KPI. And then let's do the same thing with the projects to break it down to the quarter, the month, and the week, and then do that weekly planning.
Yeah.
And if we miss the month, then we know we missed a month.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it's important to know if we missed a month, because if
Mhm.
we miss every month, then we're definitely going to miss the quarter. We're definitely miss the year. But if we, because I think what we're talking about maybe in summary is like earlier feedback, tighter feedback loops.
Yeah. And actually having the discipline. So it's discipline mindset and discipline rhythms. Like the two are so
Mm,
critical. And you talk about the monthly thing. I think that's a great way to do it. And quite often what we'll do is we'll have, there's a whole EOS thing, right? Like quarterly
yeah. Yeah.
objectives. I think having quarterly goals is good because they're small enough that they're not too far down the road, but they're not so soon that it's like, I can't do that in a month. So you make it a quarter, but sometimes even give it a theme, right? So if we're working with a client that's their most important thing might be cash flow improvement, right? So maybe the theme is like flipping the switch, right? Let's get you from reactive to proactive cash deployment, right? So it's like, okay, cool, that's our theme. Now, what are the things that we're specifically doing over this next quarter to really flip that switch, right? And then people can kind of get behind that. But if it's just like tasks or some vague goal that maybe you bump into, then you accidentally do business, right? But if you want to do business with purpose and intention, you have to set very clear objectives and you have to track them. So that's key.
Yeah. 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 And I guess maybe the tweak that I would add is that I think if what you're saying is that you shouldn't set a monthly goal because it feels like you can't achieve it in a month. Um, I think what we need to do is actually to set a monthly goal that is achievable for the month, right?
So
Like, so in other words, so take the quarter and break it down to like,
break it
okay,
down a
so what
month.
are the things in the service of that quarter that we
Yeah.
will we will be we will be behind if we don't achieve this month,
Yeah.
and then do the same thing for the week. I think we need more goals,
Yeah.
not less. We need more
100%.
goals.
Yeah, and I think so, and that's super key because if you get your quarterly goal, break it into monthly objectives and then weekly objectives, and then if each of your teams have their team meeting, like whatever day they do it, Friday tends to be best, and looks at those objectives and those metrics, then you've got a good system running at that point, right? Because you have
Yeah,
teams looking at how they're performing relative to what they're trying to do, which feeds into the week, which feeds into the month, which feeds to the quarter. And at the end of the quarter, even if you don't make it 100%, you've sure moved the needle a heck of a lot closer than if you
yeah,
didn't do that with intention, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like it. Time is flying here. It's we've covered a lot of ground. I did want to ask you about one last thing. I think I read on your on LinkedIn or something about financial shame
Mm,
caught my attention. Can you just say a few words about what you're talking about there?
yeah. Um, it's a common thing that, and it's probably relieving for a lot of people even to hear that there's a lot of people who, when they come to see us, things are not working the way that they want them to work. We talked earlier, right? Things are always kind of broken at some point in your business. Um, we see it with clients who come start working with us who have a ton of debt with the CRA, right? Big hole to dig out of when it comes to tax debt. So,
By the
um,
way, if you're in the States, that's
IRS.
Canada talk for IRS.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And so, yeah, our US clients, fortunately, we haven't bumped into major debt there. But yeah, so um, coming with that, I mentioned a little bit earlier, like we all take pride in our business and a lot of our identity is wrapped up in that. So to have to talk specifically to things that are not working and big problems that maybe nobody sees, right? Like you can have a nice flashy looking tech company, everyone's like, this is fantastic, like, nice office, right? Product service is really good, but maybe there's profitability challenges, right? And like every day or every week or whatever, like you're seeing your cash balance deplete and it's like this is not working and we only have maybe like 2 months of runway left in our cash. um, that's hard to admit when it looks really good. We have some it's funny, like with the clients that we have, a lot of clients even know of each other. And I've heard, some clients be like, oh, they have it like super together. Of course, we have to maintain confidentiality, so we can't say anything. But it's like, it's interesting because the perception of some businesses, like, that is a fantastic business, right? They've got the team is great, the branding's great, everything looks really good. Um, but it's not if you look under the hood, right? So this is where
Right.
we talk about like, are you on the right journey and how's your engine performing if we look under the hood? And so that's the hard part for a lot of business owners. And it's interesting because when we're remote, so it's usually Zoom calls, right? When we hop on a Zoom call with a client and start like getting into that. Um, when we mention that they are not the only one, or when we mention I've seen way worse tax debt than that, or when I mention I've seen a whole lot more debt, like that companies have to grow out of, you can almost see shoulders just coming down, just like a
I
level of
bet. I
relief that
bet.
comes. So yeah, if anything, if anyone's wrestling who's listening to this, like with any issues in the business where they wouldn't want anybody to know about it, just know that you're not the only one that has that issue. In fact, there's a lot of business owners wrestling with the same thing. I would highly encourage you, if you're wrestling with this, to find somebody who you can connect with on that. Even if it's someone else who owns a similar type business, be like, hey, can we journey through this together? Right. So
Mhm,
that you're not
mhm.
alone and you can air your dirty laundry with that person. Make sure it's a safe person, right? So that they're not sharing with anybody else. But that's so important because as business owners, we often do this on our own, right?
Yeah.
Start a business, want it to be successful, want it to look successful. That's usually an indicator is the perception, right? And so um, we don't necessarily talk about the weaknesses of it. And it's important to recognize them, have somebody you can confide in to talk about those things and brainstorm how you can make it better. But ultimately know you're not unique in that situation. So that often helps address just the shame part of it. And it's normal. It's normal to have something broken in your business. Your responsibility as the owner is to find a good, effective, strategic way to come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that I can just kind of visualize that relief. People realize that they're not alone.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's good of you not to toot your own horn, but the advantage. I think it is good advice to talk to fellow business owners, certainly. But one of the nice things about talking to a professional is that they like, or you and others who fractional CFOs or otherwise see a lot more than a fellow founder would, right?
Right.
So you have a
Sure.
lot of context. So maybe because you might talk to a fellow founder and like, "Ooh, man, you got a lot of debt.
Yeah, right.
I don't have that many debt." Like, it might be counterproductive.
You are
Probably
so
not. No, no, no.
unique in
You
this
should,
problem.
if it's really good to talk to your peers, but it's also good to talk to somebody who has the higher perspective, like,
Yes.
dealt with 50 different companies
Yeah.
over the last a few years, and so you have a lot of context. Even, you know, it's even more powerful to know that with that broad swath that you're still in the realm of acceptable as a
Yeah.
as a founder. You're not.
It's not game over, right? And
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah,
not gonna have to go hang your head in shame walking out the door being like, you know what, guys, I failed, right? It's like,
yeah,
okay, this is not working properly. Let's fix it. You're not
yeah,
you're not unique. So
yeah.
there are some unique things that I have never seen before, but
Right.
I'll try to be tactful in how I communicate.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, I appreciate you spending some time with me today. I like what you're up to with BasePoint, and if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how could they do that?
Yeah, basepoint.cpa. That's our website. It's probably the best way to do it. I'm on Instagram, josh.the.cpa on Instagram. So they can hit me up there. Any of the tools that we talked about in here, you can just be like, hey, can I have that? Just send me a direct message. We'll get that sent over. There's some helpful things. We talked about the model, right? The coming up with your personal goals and then tying that to your business. It's a very helpful tool that we have. One thing we didn't talk about that maybe this is another conversation for different times is like how much cash to have on hand in your business, right? Depending on your revenues and things like how long it takes to bring cash in the door, cash going out the door. So
Right.
we've got a tool for that just to help you get a sense of a benchmark for that, right? So any tools like that, happy to share some of the tools that we use here.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link to them in the notes for the
Awesome.
show. That's great. So wait, it's basepoint.cpa?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that .cpa was an option.
They
That's
came
cool.
up with it 3 years ago, maybe. I was like, hey, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So before we hit the Oklahoma land grab situation with new URLs, I was like, I think I'm gonna grab that one. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Nice. Cool. Hey, Josh, it's been a pleasure. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Founders, if you could use some help providing your leaders with structure, coaching, and accountability on strategy execution, go to HabitStack.com and book a time for us to chat. I'm Scott Ward. Thank you for joining me on the HabitStack Podcast.